The marble halls of the Vatican have witnessed centuries of carefully choreographed diplomacy. But on this day the rules were about to be shattered. What happens when a 35-year-old revolutionary leader confronts the head of the Catholic Church with centuries of colonial sins? As Captain Ibrahim Traore approached Pope Leo XIV's throne, Vatican officials tensed visibly. The young military leader of Burkina Faso, dressed not in diplomatic attire but in his signature red beret and combat fatigues, moved with deliberate purpose through a sea of suits and formal gowns. No one expected what came next, a direct challenge that would transform a ceremonial meeting into a watershed moment in Church-Africa relations. "Your Holiness," Traore's voice rang clear through the suddenly silent apostolic palace, "I come not merely to congratulate you, but to deliver a message that millions of African Catholics have waited centuries to express." In that moment, centuries of diplomatic protocol collided with raw truth as Traore produced a leather-bound document detailing the Church's complicity in Africa's exploitation, from colonial-era abuses to modern investment in extractive industries that devastate African communities. If you're fascinated by leaders who dare to speak truth to power, hit subscribe now to Magnificent Story to never miss our analysis of world-changing moments. Ibrahim Traore seized power in Burkina Faso through a September 2022 military coup, the nation's second in 8 months. At just 34, this former artillery officer became the world's youngest head of state after deposing another military leader he accused of failing to combat the jihadist insurgency ravaging the country. Unlike typical strongmen, Traore rejected luxury, maintaining a Spartan lifestyle that resonated with Burkina Faso's predominantly young population. He redirected government resources toward security and social services while positioning himself as a defender against both terrorism and Western neo-colonial influence. His red beret quickly became an iconic symbol of what supporters called revolutionary integrity. Across the world, Cardinal Antonio Vescovi of Italy had just ascended to the papacy as Pope Leo XIV following his predecessor's unexpected resignation. At 59, Vescovi was known for diplomatic skill in navigating church relationships with developing nations. His choice of the name Leo carried profound significance. Leo XIII, who served until 1903, authored Rerum Novarum, establishing modern Catholic social teaching on economic justice and workers' rights. The Vatican's relationship with Africa spans centuries, beginning with early missionary work that often accompanied colonial expansion. While the Church established schools, hospitals, and community centers across the continent, it also frequently aligned with colonial powers, blessing the 1885 Berlin Conference that divided Africa among European nations. But sometimes history is made when protocol is broken. These two men, separated by age, culture, and institutional power, were about to create an unprecedented moment in Vatican-African relations that would challenge centuries of established diplomatic practice. The Apostolic Palace gleamed with centuries of accumulated wealth, gold-leafed ceilings, Renaissance masterpieces, and marble floors polished to mirror-like perfection. World leaders gathered in their finest attire for Pope Leo XIV's first diplomatic reception following his installation. Presidents, prime ministers, and monarchs mingled in a carefully orchestrated dance of power and protocol. Security teams exchanged nervous glances as Ibrahim Traore entered. While other dignitaries wore formal suits or traditional ceremonial dress, Burkina Faso's young leader arrived in his military fatigues and signature red beret. The contrast was jarring, intentionally so. Traore moved through the reception with military precision, his eyes focused and determined. Vatican protocol dictated brief, ceremonial exchanges with the new pontiff, congratulatory words, perhaps a gift exchange, and a respectful departure. The Swiss guards and papal security detail had positioned themselves strategically throughout the hall, trained to handle disruptions with swift discretion. When Traore's turn came to approach the papal throne, the customary kiss of the Pope's ring was expected. Instead, he stood at full height, making direct eye contact with the pontiff. Your Holiness, he began, his voice carrying through the suddenly hushed hall, I come not merely to congratulate you, but to deliver a message that millions of African Catholics have waited centuries to express. The assembled diplomats froze. Vatican officials moved subtly toward the pair, uncertain whether to intervene. Pope Leo XIV raised his hand slightly, signaling them to stand down as he leaned forward to listen. Have you ever been in a situation where speaking an uncomfortable truth was necessary despite the consequences? Where remaining silent would have been easier but morally impossible? Like this video, if you believe historical injustices should be addressed openly, even in the most prestigious halls of power. The Catholic Church has been present in my country for generations, Traore continued, his voice steady and clear. Vatican officials discreetly signaled for him to keep his remarks brief, signals he pointedly ignored. Our people have embraced its teachings, built its churches, and filled its seminaries. Yet the relationship has too often been one-directional, with African Catholics expected to receive wisdom rather than contribute it. The young leader then produced a leather-bound document from inside his military jacket. The hall fell completely silent as he held it up for all to see. Your Holiness, this contains a comprehensive analysis of Vatican financial holdings with connections to extractive industries operating throughout Africa. The Church speaks eloquently about the dignity of the poor while its investment portfolio profits from their exploitation. Gasps echoed through the hall as Traore detailed specific investments. Vatican-linked funds holding positions in mining operations that had displaced communities in Burkina Faso, polluted water sources, and exported wealth while leaving environmental devastation behind. These operations have forced thousands from ancestral lands, contaminated drinking water for entire villages, and left behind toxic waste that will poison the soil for generations, Traore stated, his voice unwavering. The French ambassador whispered urgently to an aide. American diplomats exchanged concerned glances. Vatican financial officials stood rigid, faces carefully composed but eyes betraying alarm. Watch as the power dynamic shifts in this sacred hall. Traore then delivered his most provocative challenge. The colonization of Africa was blessed by previous occupants of your throne, Your Holiness. The 1885 Berlin Conference that divided our continent among European powers received papal recognition. The extraction of our resources and suppression of our cultures proceeded with the Church's tacit approval for centuries. He paused, allowing the weight of history to fill the ornate hall before continuing. I come not to condemn but to challenge. If the Church truly believes in the preferential option for the poor, a principle your predecessors have affirmed, then it must examine how its economic choices either undermine or support that commitment. The assembled diplomats shifted uncomfortably in their seats, witnessing a confrontation unprecedented in modern Vatican diplomacy. What happened next stunned even the most seasoned Vatican observers. Rather than offering diplomatic platitudes or deferring the matter to Vatican officials, Pope Leo XIV rose from his ornate throne. In a move breaking centuries of protocol that maintains physical elevation between the Pope and visiting dignitaries, he stepped down to stand eye-to-eye with Traore. Captain Traore, he replied, deliberately using the military title rather than presidential honorific. Acknowledging the complicated nature of Traore's rise to power, the Church must always be open to examination of conscience. Truth, however uncomfortable, must be faced with courage. The Pope then extended his hands and accepted the leather-bound document directly from Traore. Veteran Vatican watchers gasped audibly. This gesture bypassed the Secretariat of State, who traditionally screens all materials before papal review. The Church's mission in Africa cannot be separated from questions of justice, historical and present, the Pope continued, his voice carrying the weight of 2,000 years of institutional authority. While I cannot make policy commitments in this forum, I can promise you this. Your message will not be filed away and forgotten. The concerns you raise deserve serious consideration. This is where centuries of diplomatic tradition meets a new era of accountability. The Pope's response revealed strategic brilliance. By meeting Traore as an equal, He transformed what could have been an embarrassing confrontation into a moment of moral leadership. By accepting the document personally, he signaled genuine engagement rather than bureaucratic deflection. The Church must be honest about its past to be credible in its present, the Pope concluded. African Catholics deserve not just our pastoral care but our respectful attention to their experiences and perspectives. Comment below with which historical injustice you think deserves formal acknowledgement from powerful institutions. Which long-ignored truths should be brought into the light. Within hours, the Vatican encounter dominated global headlines. Media outlets worldwide scrambled to analyze the unprecedented diplomatic exchange, with coverage reflecting deeply divided perspectives. Conservative Catholic commentators condemned Traore's approach as a calculated ambush. This military leader exploited a ceremonial occasion to score political points, declared the Catholic Herald. Such confrontational tactics have no place in papal diplomacy. Progressive Catholic voices offered starkly different interpretations. Pope Leo's willingness to receive direct criticism represents a new model of church leadership, wrote America magazine. This exchange may mark the beginning of a long-overdue reckoning with colonial legacies. Across Africa, media outlets celebrated Traore's boldness regardless of religious affiliation. Kenya's Daily Nation ran the headline, "For once, Africa speaks and Rome listens." Nigeria's The Guardian noted that Traore accomplishes with words what diplomats couldn't achieve in decades. Western governments responded with characteristic caution. France, with its complex post-colonial relationship with Burkina Faso, expressed concern about the appropriateness of the forum, while acknowledging legitimate historical questions. The United States emphasized its support for constructive dialogue between religious and political leaders. In Burkina Faso itself, Traore's standing soared. Even citizens skeptical of his military governance praised his courage in confronting one of the world's most powerful institutions. Catholic parishes throughout the country reported increased attendance, with many priests incorporating discussions of the exchange into their sermons. The question now is whether this moment will lead to real change or become just another diplomatic footnote in the long history of Africa-Vatican relations. 3 months after the encounter that shook Vatican diplomacy, Pope Leo XIV announced the formation of the Commission for Truth and Reconciliation in Church-Africa Relations. This unprecedented panel, comprised primarily of African Catholic theologians, historians, and community leaders, was tasked with examining the Church's historical role in colonization and making recommendations for institutional reform. This commission represents our commitment to honest dialogue and meaningful action, the Pope stated in his announcement. We cannot build a just future without acknowledging the past. More significantly, the Vatican's powerful investment committee initiated a comprehensive review of its financial holdings in extractive industries operating in Africa. Several investments flagged in Traore's document were already being divested, with funds redirected towards sustainable development projects in affected communities. The Pope also accepted Traore's invitation to visit Burkina Faso, scheduling it as his first apostolic journey to Africa, a clear signal of the impact the young leader's message had made. Vatican sources confirmed the visit would include meetings with communities affected by mining operations and discussions about new models of church-state partnership. Beyond Catholic circles, the diplomatic world took notice. The Traore approach, directly addressing historical injustices rather than accepting diplomatic niceties, began inspiring other leaders from formerly colonized nations. At the UN General Assembly, representatives from several African and Caribbean nations adopted similarly direct language when addressing former colonial powers. What we're witnessing is a fundamental shift in diplomatic discourse, noted Dr. Aminata Diallo, professor of international relations at the University of Ouagadougou. Leaders from the global south are increasingly unwilling to participate in diplomatic theater that obscures historical truths. The Vatican-Traore exchange reveals a profound truth about global power. Moral authority can transcend military might and economic dominance. By challenging the Pope on ethical grounds rather than political ones, Traore elevated both himself and Burkina Faso in the global conversation. What Traore understood, explains Dr. Aminata Diallo, is that even the most powerful institutions become vulnerable when confronted with their own stated principles. The Church couldn't dismiss concerns about justice without undermining its moral foundation. This diplomatic earthquake demonstrates how speaking truth directly, without the cushion of diplomatic niceties, can reshape international relations more effectively than traditional approaches. When leaders from smaller nations abandon the script of deference, they reclaim narrative power typically monopolized by global powers. Perhaps most importantly, the encounter highlights how addressing historical injustices isn't merely about the past. It's essential for creating authentic relationships in the present. Institutions that acknowledge their historical roles in oppression gain credibility that no public relations campaign could achieve. As one Vatican insider anonymously confided, the young captain from Burkina Faso accomplished something remarkable. He made the church uncomfortable in exactly the way it needed to be. For more analysis of leaders challenging the established order, subscribe now to Magnificent Story and hit the notification bell. Next week, how a small Pacific Island nation's leader confronted the UN Security Council with evidence of climate colonialism and changed the global environmental agenda forever.